Hi Enviro students, today I'm going to take you guys through sections 3.1 and 5.1 in the book. You should have gone through at least the handbook in the ecosystems gizmo. I'm going to use that as a reference to go over trophic pyramids with you guys. Before we get into that, I'm going to do ecological ladder, which is section 3.1 in your book. So in your notes, if you just want to draw out this step stair that you see in mine, I'm going to first just go out by going over the 6 levels. So level 1, you have an individual, you can say organism. So that's the first level of study. Then you have a population, and that's typically a species. And that species is able to reproduce with each other. Then the next level is called a community. The next level after a species is called a community. And when we talk about a community, we talk about all of the animals that live in a specific area or ecosystem. And that jumps us to the next level, which is an ecosystem. When we talk about ecosystems, again, we're talking about abiotic and biotic factors. And then the next level is called a biome. This is when we're talking about a large area that has a specific type of climate, similar precipitation, similar temperatures throughout an area. It's a much larger area than what you would think within an ecosystem. And then the last is the biosphere. And another word for biosphere would be the earth. So these are your 6 levels in the ecological ladder, and these are just different levels of study that you can do within ecology. Okay, so again, a species, these are organisms that can reproduce with each other and create more offspring that are able to reproduce. Community, that is all of the living things or biotic factors interacting together. Ecosystem, that's your biotic and abiotic. And then again, your biome is that large area with a similar climate. And then again, your last layer, biosphere, is the earth. So these are the 6 steps within the ecological ladder. So this is what they're talking about when they go into section 3.1. The other key things you need to pull out of 3.1 is biotic and abiotic. And again, biotic are living things, abiotic are non-living things. All right, we're going to jump into talking about the things that you see within 5.1. For that, we are going to pull from your gizmo that you guys looked at in class. So this gizmo right here, I'm going to pull from this example that you see. So the sun to the plants to the fish to the turtle to the raccoon. In your lab, I asked you guys to draw a trophic pyramid and identify the different levels. So I'm going to redo that for you guys just so you can see what I was asking for and make sure that you have the correct answers within your notes. So in your notes, you guys were asked to identify what an ecosystem is, draw out the food chain, and then do a trophic pyramid and identify all of these various things within a trophic pyramid. And we're going to jump over to the notes and go over what these things are. Okay, so the first thing that you guys had to do was define what an ecosystem is. So an ecosystem is a community of living things and how they interact with their physical environment. And again, that includes your abiotic factors. All right, the second part that I asked you guys to do was to draw out that food chain for that pond environment or the pond ecosystem. So you're going to start with your producers, and then you go into primary consumer, and then jump to your secondary consumer, and then your tertiary consumer, and then you can go on to a quaternary consumer if you have one. For the pond, we start out with the plants. You always draw your arrows towards what is eating. So the plants were being eaten by the fish, and then your fish was getting eaten by your turtle. Turtle was getting eaten by the raccoon. And then if we jump back to our gizmo, that is our 4 levels. So that would be producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and your tertiary. So that would be the levels that you see within that ecosystem. If we were going to take this food chain, and again, a food chain shows you a single pathway of energy through an ecosystem. If you want to get more complex and show multiple pathways, that is what we call the food web. So this is an example of a food chain. You get one with lots of arrows to different types of animals and organisms and plants. That is a food web. So that's a lot more interaction. And if we're going to do a food chain, we can do a trophic pyramid. A trophic pyramid shows the energy flow throughout an ecosystem. So if we take this one up here and we apply it into this trophic pyramid, we're going to start with our producers on the first level. Producers always go on that first level, and that would be our plants, or our aquatic plants. Then you go to your primary consumer. I'm going to put PC for primary consumer, and that would be fish. And some visuals here, just so to remember what is happening at each level. And then we get into our secondary consumer, and that was our turtle. And then you have your tertiary consumer, and that was your raccoon. And with my luck, this is going to look more like a cat than a raccoon. Yep, more like a cat. But hey, you guys get the idea. We have these things going into the different levels. This is the flow of energy going up the chain, or even up the food web if we get into more complex systems. Next thing that we do is we want to add the sun in here, because that's where all of the energy starts out. So that's usually the base of our trophic pyramids. At each level, usually we have a certain amount of energy. To keep things simple, I'm going to use just a simple base 10 here on our level. So I'm going to start out with 1,000 on the first level with the plants, and then 10% of that will jump to the next level, which means I'm going to cut off a 0 off the end, and I have 100 kilojoules on the next level. 10% of that will jump into the turtle. So that will be, again, drop a 0. That'll be 10. Again, that's 10%. And then we have 10% jump up into the raccoon, which means at the top we only have 1 kilojoule of energy. So you guys can see, again, this is not a highly efficient system. We only have 10%. What's happening to the rest of this energy? Well, it's getting lost as mostly heat energy out into the environment. Okay, and then there's one more aspect of the trophic pyramid that I'd like to put in there, and that was our decomposers. So we have the scavengers coming in the gizmo here. In this case we have vultures, so we'll put vultures into our trophic pyramid, and again, they can come in at any of these levels. I think we also have mushrooms in the gizmo, so fungi, and they can break down any of these levels. Usually bacteria and fungi are called decomposers. Animals that eat organisms are referred to as detrivores. And that can include insects, animals like birds. It can also include larger creatures like hyenas. All right, so there is what your trophic pyramid should look like. If we added in decomposers into this food chain, it would again be pulled from all the levels. And that's where you would put your decomposers in. Okay, just to review terms, producers produce their own energy. That means these are called autotrophs. Those guys have the ability to make their own, so we call them auto. Everybody else on each of these levels would be considered a heterotroph. Heterotrophs have to consume energy. All right, gonna pop back over to your lab just to make sure that we covered all of the stuff that you were asked for in your notes. Okay, the last thing you guys were asked to do in your notes when you're done or while you're going through the handbook is to define what a keystone species is. So a keystone species is a species that other species are highly dependent on. And it can be, anything from an ant to a wolf that is dependent on that species. I believe the example within the gizmo were the bees. You took the bees out of the system and you had a large collapse within the actual food web that they show you. But then they have the other example where they remove, I think it was the rabbits, and it wasn't such a big impact. So keystone species, it's a large impact. That's what you need to remember. You take that out and it has a high impact. If you take a species out and it doesn't have a high impact, then it is not considered a keystone. And keystone species can have more than an impact on just the food web. It can also have a large impact on the food chain. It can have a larger impact than just on the food chain. It can also have an impact on even the landscape itself and how the land looks. So when you guys go through the gizmo, if you did not get to the point where you looked at the wolves in Yellowstone, then please make sure you get to that point, because that is kind of the epic example that we will use throughout class. In our next set of notes, I'll go through keystone species, but I'll show you guys with a different example with sea urchins and river or sea otters. All right, guys, that's it for. All right, guys, those are the notes for 3.1 and 5.1.